Hello everyone, welcome back to League of Legends DFS Esports Breakdown for October the 8th, World's Main Event, day number 2. Pretty solid start to day number 1. The RNG Gen G game literally wrapped up like less than 5 minutes ago, but I want to try to get this video out with day 1 info and kind of as soon as possible. So hopefully this is a kind of the most optimal time to go ahead and do this, but we'll kind of quickly recap it and then talk a little bit about more what to expect tomorrow. So overall, overarching, pretty solid day. We went, I believe, 5 out of 6 games to start the day. 3 underdogs, all 3 underdogs we were on ended up coming through. So I'm very, very pleased and very, very happy we were able to identify those spots, talk about them. I'm glad we put in the work to, look into these games and all that stuff. I'm just, very happy to be able to come off with such a good start, especially after such a terrible performance during play-ins. It definitely makes me very happy to kind of get back on the board in a pretty good way here. Fnatic, I believe, we're plus 105, maybe something small, but pretty small underdog. Flying Oysters, I believe, were plus 170. I think I had them 160, something like that. And then RNG, I believe, were something similar, like plus 180 or something similar. So 3 plus money tickets cashed, so that's pretty solid. The only game we were incorrect on was EDG versus T1. EDG definitely looked pretty bad, but we'll go ahead and kind of game by game a little bit here. The only reason we're kind of going to put a little bit of stock into these games is just because this is like the world's main event. This is what all these teams are practicing playing for. This is the moment where these teams all put all their things into this basket. So normally that's why you would probably not want to put a ton of stock into these one game sample sizes, because teams may be practicing stuff or what have you. But at the end of the day, I think these games they're so important that I think they're worth enough to kind of look into. I know they can be a little bit fluky because of how snowbally and how quickly these things can get away from you in League of Legends. It's just like kind of the nature of the game. But overall, pretty pleased, obviously. We like the Fnatic underdog money line pick. They ended up kind of coming through. Again, not the greatest in terms of DFS scores. I think C9 ended up kind of getting outplayed pretty hard here. C9 drafting was obviously pretty suspect. I don't think there's really too much to kind of touch on here. I just think Fnatic was the better team. They outdrafted them pretty heavily. I think Cloud9 have to adapt, and they need to look and try to get onto this Maokai for them to kind of have a little bit bigger chance. To kind of adapt pretty much. I'm not sure how else to kind of put it, but I just think they need to adapt. They need to get onto this Maokai. They need to improve, and I think they got outdrafted pretty heavily. I do believe it looks like Fnatic had some info on Cloud9's game plan. It looks like as they went ahead and banned the Olaf Yumi, which is pretty unique, considering and compared to everywhere else. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. That if it looks like Fnatic's game plan came in, kind of checkmated Cloud9 from the start. But overall, I actually don't think Cloud9 played too poorly. I don't think Fnatic played too poorly overall. I think both these teams are actually looking pretty solid. I think both these teams will actually probably be able to win some games over EDG. Again, I don't want to put too much stock into one game sample. I know that's a pretty kind of silly thing to do overall. But at the same time, I think it's okay to learn and adapt even from a one game sample. I think overall I was very, very stunned with EDG's performance and how poorly they looked. I think Cloud9 and Fnatic both looked pretty strong. So I'm still not out on either of these teams. I'm definitely buying in Fnatic. I'm buying in Cloud9, although there isn't a lot of spots really to do so. Obviously, four teams in a group. They play each other each twice. There's not a lot of interesting spots here. You're obviously not going to get Fnatic as an underdog against Cloud9 again. But, maybe some spots will arise. Maybe the price tags will get crazy. Who knows? But I'm overall pretty pleased with both of these teams. Dom1 G2. Again, this is a spot where I actually think Dom One looked like very good. Obviously, they completely destroyed G2, especially at that top lane skirmish for that Herald that put the game kind of out of reach very very quickly. They played a massively fought fight, especially from Showmaker on the Azir. Overall, I don't think G2 looked that bad either. They actually found a lot of interesting spots. I think they actually could have brought the game back a good bit. If I think if G2 were going up against a little bit of a lesser opponent, I think they could have had more opportunities to bring this game back. I'm actually pretty pleased with G2's performance. I think they're going to be a pretty interesting dog to look at in their group as well. I think maybe their odds are going to get a little bit adjusted, and maybe they're going to be a little bit overlooked going into these next few games in their group. But overall, I think Dom 1 obviously came out the gates looking very, very strong. I think G2 actually looked pretty solid as well. I think their draft was actually pretty interesting. They just kind of lacked damage. I think that's something that they're probably going to look into and adapt with. However, I think with the Caps, Jankos, Broken Blade, that kind of trio of champions and how they played out, they actually looked pretty good, and they actually looked pretty live in some of these fights. They just were down so much, and they were just behind so much that it looked kind of in vain. But Dom 1 looked pretty good. Again, when we kind of look at this as a DFS spot overall, I kind of glanced over this on the Cloud9 Fnatic game, but this is a game we were not on as much. They ended up making my card, Fnatic did, but I think you probably would have been relatively fine, kind of only with upset there, so that's something to kind of keep in mind. I did expect that one to be a little bit slower, and it was. I did think Dom 1 would be able to get a little bit more. They ended up getting 17, but I think there was that one felt a little bit low. I do think if G2 are going to lose, they're going to fight it out. And I think this was a little bit of a certain scenario where G2 recognized that they were so far behind, it wasn't even worth fighting in a lot of these spots. I think if the game's a little bit closer, we're going to see G2 brawl it out a lot more. So I think G2 is going to be an exciting DFS spot for sure. And overall, I think again we kind of hit this one on the head. CBT, CTBC Flying Oyster. They ended up winning this one over 100 Thieves. The bottom lane was really the gigantic difference here. Gemini as well. It kind of felt like Flying Oyster was kind of better in every role, and that's kind of what we were expecting, honestly. Again, I was pretty shocked by the odds in this one. Shun, the young AD carry, came through, performed very, very well. I was very impressed with Flying Oyster. Again, this was kind of the spot. I don't expect Flying Oyster to go ahead and beat RNG or Gen G as well. That group is insanely tough, so it's not very exciting. I think overall they looked a little bit decently proactive. I think both these teams were willing to throw down a good bit, and it was a pretty decent game. I'm pretty pleased with CBT or CTBC Flying Oyster. I'm just gonna go ahead and keep calling them the Oysters. But yeah, Shun ended up scoring well. Gemini scored pretty well. My stacks were just crying at the fact. Whoops, sorry, my mic fell down onto my keyboard. My stacks were just crying at the fact that Resk had 9 assists, Mission had 9 assists, and Koala had one of the fights where he was picked beforehand. So overall, I think Flying Oyster is a little bit interesting as a DFS option, but again, I don't think we're going to get them as the underdog price that we had against 100 Thieves again, and obviously I'm not buying into them versus their other two teams as well. So it's just kind of like we cashed in where we could, and then we kind of move on. GDG EG. I keep wanting to say EDG. We've been saying that all year, but EG and then JDG. This one kind of went as expected. JDG ended up coming through. They ended up having the really solid performance from these players. I had jokingly mentioned it to during the Shark Cove podcast where I was tuning in. I wanted to get some different opinions on some stuff just because I wasn't entirely sure on where everybody else was with these games, and personally, I kind of like being on an island with, my kind of ideas and stuff. I don't like being swayed or being pushed into different directions when it comes to what picks I want to make, because I know it sounds a little bit odd when I'm somebody who's trying to kind of give out picks here, but at the end of the day, I just want to make my picks and I want to have the onus on me. Like, I don't want to have to blame anyone else if the picks lose or anything. I just want to be like, you know what, I was wrong, I was right. That's kind of how it was. I mentioned in that podcast that we're gonna have a big Kanavi game, and it ended up coming through. I jokingly said it was going to be a 15 kill Kanavi Belveth spot. It ended up being a 12 kill Kanavi Viego spot. Pretty tough. That's obviously kind of like what we were expecting, and that's what I was kind of hoping not to happen. I didn't end up having any JDG. I tried to like kind of leave them off a little bit. I was hoping that the game would just kind of bust, but you know, kind of went. It obviously went pretty well here. I think JDG looked kind of interesting. They didn't look too great. The score seems a little lopsided, but I think it was actually relatively close for most of it. EG actually had like a relatively decent-ish lead. They definitely had opportunities. I think specifically Kaori looked pretty strong in the bottom lane. Inspired actually looked pretty decent. Jojo, his score looked pretty bad. He definitely didn't play great. But he got heavily focused, and I definitely think they need bigger impact from Impact and Vulcan. Both of those players underperformed, but I think overall EEG looked pretty solid, and I think they're actually going to be a team that we're willing to buy into here going forward. I actually respected their play a good bit today, and I think JDG is going to be an interesting spot going forward as well. I think they're going to be definitely beatable in these best of one, so that's going to be interesting to keep a note of. Perhaps the most interesting one of the day, T1 versus EDG. Again, I don't want to spend too much time going through these breakdowns just because, again, it's best of ones. I don't want to put too much stock into this, but I think overall EDG's game plan in this one was very concerning. It looks like they have not adapted throughout these old patches very well at all. If you guys recall back to when towards the end of LPL summer, when we were talking about the games daily and that kind of thing, the patches that we were on were, I believe, 12.11, 12.12, and 12.13 was like the main summer patches. And as you guys could see at the bottom of these games, we're on patch 12.18. So we've had 5 different patches worth of updates and changes to these teams and to these champions, to these numbers on these items and everything. The game changes so much patch by patch. And it just seems like EDG have not adapted their style at all, especially when we look at like this Kempunk's Chainsword Rush by Vi. It seems like they were the only team that had that priority on Vi. JJ built a pretty poor item, I would say, all things considered. You know, granted, people don't really buy the item for its healing reduction per se. It wasn't the worst spot for healing reduction, but at the end of the day, they got very little value from it. It seemed very odd. They just seemed really one-dimensional, and it just seemed like a very outdated style that just does not work the same as it does anymore. Especially when we look at the Renata Kalista bottom lane, it just does not seem to be bullying out these champion like this Sivir Yumi like it did before. Faker looked very strong on this Akali. It was just an odd game and kind of game plan from EDG. T1 looked pretty solid. I think overall, this is probably going to be like a little bit of a hot take. I know I'm somebody who was low on T1 already, but I'm putting this one a little bit more on EDG looking pretty bad. And I definitely think EDG are going to be susceptible to losing to both Fnatic and Cloud9 going forward. And I do think T1, I would favor T1 over Fnatic and Cloud9, obviously. That'll just kind of be an odds-based thing. I'm not putting T1 quite into the bucket of I'm looking to go against them or with them. At the moment, I think they're staying in like the kind of neutral field. However, I'm going to move EDG over into the I'm looking to play teams against them bucket just because of their weird, outdated draft and style. RNG Genji, this game just wrapped up. We ended up cashing again this RNG underdog. But before I get into this too much, I'm going to take a drink here and refresh my throat a little bit. I'm sure you guys can understand. Okay. So, pretty interesting one, all things considered. I think Genji's draft, I respect the fact they're going to these unique things like the Singe, like the Singed Senna bottom lane. They're going back to the Peanut Poppy again. That seems like a little bit of an outdated selection. RNG had the Graves jungle with Wei. I definitely liked what I heard from. I don't want to sound like an idiot, but I think it was Josh Robertson over on the Shark Cove podcast that he does, or that he appeared with Emmerich on the Shark Cove podcast. I like the way he put it. I think it was pretty interesting that I think these carry junglers are going to be a little bit of a bait for these teams. I definitely agreed with it, but man, did the Graves look very, very strong in a few of these games. Especially in the hands of these insane junglers like Canyon and Wei. I don't think Wei is particularly that insanely individually skilled. He's obviously very, very solid, but nonetheless, they just looked very good. Again, their picks were a little interesting and a little bit off the board. They're kind of the only team going with the Jax. I haven't seen that much priority on the Lissandra, really. They're still looking to get that Aphelios as well. They kind of seem like in a bucket of their own, again, with their picks. But again, they kind of make a little bit more sense. They work a little bit differently. And it's not like they were particularly poor either. When I look at these RNG unique selections, I think they're a little bit stronger when you look and compare them to something like EDG's picks, where it's just kind of outdated and they've just been kind of nerfed and overtaken by some of the other things. The RNG ones weren't particularly beaten to the ground. I just think other things became a little bit better options, but RNG still had the ability to pull them off. So overall, again, I think this is a fantastic result. We were on the RNG underdog pick. They didn't quite do that greatly for DK purposes, which was a little bit unfortunate. But at the end of the day, I think they're still willing to push a pace and be interesting at going forward. Obviously, both of these teams are going to have pretty free matchups coming up against Oysters and 100 Thieves. So it's not too enticing, but I think both of these teams, specifically when we're going up against 100 Thieves, I think whoever plays 100 Thieves next is going to be in a little bit of a better spot. I don't know how much of a pace Oysters are willing to push. I'm not sure really where either of these teams, when referencing the Thieves or the Oysters, I'm not sure if either of those teams are willing to give up and die a lot. That's something we might have to see and maybe learn a little bit about. But either way, I think both these teams are going to win the rest of their games. I think both these teams are obviously going to slide through their group, probably at like 5-1, maybe. Maybe RNG get the sweep and Gen G end up going 4-2. I'm not sure, but either way, both these teams are going to be going through for sure. And they both look very strong, and I'm just glad to get the RNG underdog pick there and call it good. So pretty amazing start to day one. Obviously, we'll go ahead and get started talking about day number 2. Again, another 6-gamer. It should be pretty interesting. Have it over on DK. There are a couple interesting spots for sure. I'm definitely looking forward to these, to a few of these spots. I've kind of looked ahead a little bit, but not too much. We obviously have the introduction of the other group, I believe Group C, having their first go of games here. So we have DRX, Gigabyte Marines, Rogue, and Top Esports coming in. So that's something to keep a note of. One thing I want to quickly note with Top Esports is it looks like there's been some scrim leaks or something. There's definitely been something coming out of this Top Esports lineup where it looks like they've been going with a little bit of a off-meta strategy in some practices. It looks like they've been going with the support mid laner for Knight, and they just end up kind of sacking mid lane and letting Tian go crazy, and he becomes like the hard carry. He ends up taking all the jungle camps and the mid lane farm. If you guys are unfamiliar with League of Legends, it's the strategy is called funneling. It used to be essentially it's just you funnel all of the farm from as much as you can into one player, typically the jungler. In this case, it would be Tian, and yeah, that's pretty much the strategy. Is it looks like they just kind of get another support. They get a second support for Knight, and then you let Tian get every farm from the mid lane and the jungle, and then he just becomes super outscaled compared to everyone on the enemy team, and kind of goes crazy. It's been nerfed a few times. There's been a lot of iterations of it. It's a play style the Riot Games really just does not want in the game, but it looks like it's kind of making a little bit of a resurgence here. So that's something to keep in mind as we go forward. But at least for DFS, that it looks like Tian could be a little bit of interesting option when it comes to captain and that kind of stuff. We'll talk about that when we get there. So, a few interesting spots here off the bat. Pretty interesting stuff. I'm pretty excited. I'm pretty excited for this day. I think there's going to be a lot more spots we can look into and try to adjust with and adapt. For sure. One thing I wanted to look at, maybe we'll look at it when the time comes. We're not going to look at it now, but I'd be interested in looking at some of the other spots where we look at deaths per loss. I'd like to see some of these teams and like how much they die. Like for example, we know that when G2 die or when G2 lose, they typically die a lot. They like to fight their way back into games if they're losing, that kind of thing. So that's a spot to look to go up against. But for example, like Gigabyte Marines, I know that they don't play with that much of a pace. They do play with a pretty good pace, a really good pace, nearly 30 kills per map, but nonetheless, I just wonder how that translates. So that for example is going to be pretty interesting to look into. But we'll go ahead and get started. Go top to down again. First one up, Rogue versus DRX. Again, new teams coming in for from Group C. I'm gonna keep this one a little bit simple. I'm actually gonna go with the Rogue underdog pick here. It's kind of been the theme I think we're going to kind of continue with. Although the LCK did go 2-0 yesterday, they did look very strong. Or 2-1, I guess Gen G ended up losing, but nonetheless, I think Dom 1 actually looked pretty good. Obviously T1 looked pretty good as well. Gen G lost to RNG. It's not a big deal there. I'm just not buying into DRX. The concern definitely is here with the fact that DRX did play play-ins. They did just come off the stage. They've been playing, they've been here, that kind of thing. That I think that does matter. I think that does make a difference. I think especially when you look at something like the Fnatic Cloud9 series from yesterday, I think it definitely factored in. It does concern me. I just think when we look at how well Rogue played in Europe, it definitely does concern me. There's kind of been like a little bit of an off time here. DRX have been playing. I'm not sure what we're going to get from Rogue, but if we get the Rogue that we saw in the LEC, I think this is going to be a pretty close game. Maybe even, just slightly favored DRX maybe. I'm just not quite agreeing with this price tag as well. I think it's going to be a pretty interesting spot. I think we know DRX play with a relatively solid pace as well. I'd be willing to look at Rogue a little bit here as an underdog, but again, I don't know how. I don't think either of these teams play with it in an electric pace at all. So I'm going to tentatively have Rogue as an underdog. I think there's going to be other better underdog spots that we're going to talk about later on, but for now, I think they're relatively decent as that as a money line option. They're going to be my pick. I'm going to go with the Rogue underdog pick here. It's not the most confident. I'm not as confident in Rogue versus DRX as I was with some of the games yesterday. For example, but nonetheless, I think this price is a little bit crazy in my opinion. I don't think coming out of play-ins is that big of a deal. I do think Rogue is still, you could argue, is like even the slightly better team. Just what we've seen from DRX in the past. I know they look decent in play-ins, but again, factoring in level of competition, I don't think that's too impressive. Up next is Evil Geniuses versus G2. So this is an extremely important matchup for these teams. Obviously, they're in this group of death where they have JD Gaming, Damwon Kia. These matchups between these kind of quote-unquote lower end teams is going to be insanely important. And I'm going to go with the underdog pick here again as well with EG. Similar price as to, the previous one, Rogue, plus 155. I don't think there's like a ton really here to kind of break down, but I actually think this is actually a lot closer than it looks. And really what this comes down to, I think, is a lot of the play we saw yesterday. Granted, I do think G2 actually looked pretty good yesterday. I don't want to. This is not that much of a knock on G2. It's more of I was very intrigued with what we saw from EG. I think they actually looked very solid yesterday in a lot of spots versus JD Gaming. Obviously, JD Gaming probably like a top 5 team at the tournament, and in EG definitely looked very lively in it. I think they made some crucial mistakes like dying very early. I think like even before the minion spawned, like within the first minute or so, Vulcan had a death. I think Impact played pretty poorly as well. I think EG can improve and build upon yesterday, and they get that very tough gaming, or they get that very tough game against JD Gaming out of the way. They get a little bit more of a winnable matchup against G2, and I think overall G2 is like generally a little bit overrated, especially when it comes to these price tags. I think this is actually like a relatively fair price, but I'm willing to go to this EG spot either way. I actually think this is a pretty interesting price. Like, and again, this kind of does cater into. I think G2 will die and give up a lot of deaths, especially from a DFS standpoint. When we look at these games, I think EG can capitalize on this. I do think this is going to be a pretty good spot here. I do kind of agree with the line. Like, I don't think it'd be that crazy, but when I look at this game, it's definitely going to be EG or nothing. Like, I don't know if I really want a part of the G2 side. I don't think EG will die as many times as they did yesterday. That's for sure. But overall, I was impressed with EG's willingness to take these fights and stuff. We know G2 like to take the fights as well. I do think this one could be a pretty solid game. This is definitely one I want to target a good bit anyway. And I know EG, I just have a feeling that they actually looked very solid yesterday. I know G2 did as well. Like, I don't know. It's tough because I like both these teams. They're actually both teams I kind of want to buy into here. But, nonetheless, I just got this feeling here that I just kind of want to go with this EG side. You guys know that I'm not very big on NA overall. I've been pretty low on them most of the tournament, especially yesterday. It actually ended up coming through very well, getting both the underdogs against NA. But I actually think EG looked pretty spry, and I think they looked pretty interesting. The thing that does concern me is again, G2 looked very, very capable of if the circumstances were a little bit different in G2's game, they definitely would have been a lot closer with Dom 1. And I don't know. It's just kind of interesting. I think these teams are very close. I could definitely see it going either way. And I think when you have one of the teams that's minus 200, one of them is plus 150, and it's going to be a close game, I think I'll just take the underdog side. I don't want to overly complicate that one. T1 Fnatic. To keep this one simple, this is just going to be a stay away for me. I do think T1 win, but the price tag is just a little bit wide. I don't agree with this one really at all. I think T1 do win it, but again, I just don't agree with that price. Maybe if I didn't have so many underdog picks, we'd be looking a little bit here at Fnatic. But from a DFS standpoint, especially, I think this one's going to be relatively slow. I'm not too intrigued by this series at all. This one's going to be a quick stay away for me. I just don't feel it from either side. I think it's going to be pretty slow. It's going to be the one. I want to try to X out some of these games because I think Rogue DRX is interesting. I think G2 is interesting. There's a few more games down the road that are very interesting. So I think this one's going to be an easy X off for me right now. I just don't see it. I just don't see the spot really from either side. I think maybe we'll look at a small stack of T1 to kind of, get in, as a pretty decent favorite. But I think there's just other spots I'd like to get to. Maybe the T1 are a little bit overlooked and they're going to be a little bit underowned. You could make an argument that way, but again, that's kind of stretching it, I think. So I'm just going to kind of go ahead and X this one off my list of games that I'm looking at. Up next is Cloud9 EDG. So again, I kind of alluded to this earlier, but I'm actually going to be going with Cloud9 here. I know this is kind of crazy. It's a little bit unprecedented almost, it feels like, that we're kind of starting off with 3 out of the 4 games are going with underdogs. And, they're relatively decently sized dogs here. I think Rogue plus 160, EG 155, Cloud9 plus 300. It's a pretty insane price tag. Again, looking, I would think the reason I'm reacting so heavily to this day one result from EDG T1 again, I definitely understand if people want to, listen to this and say I'm putting way too much stock into one game. I definitely would agree with that, and I don't find your faults there. I just think when you look at the context of this is the world's stage, I don't think you're holding or keeping any. I don't think you're keeping any strats like under wraps and holding to pull them out for the future stages. Like I think maybe you could make a case like for Gen G, RNG, they can keep things a little bit more under wraps because they're not really, I don't think, in danger of losing their group or anything. Like both of these teams should be getting out. I don't think the same case could be made for EDG T1. I think Cloud9 and Fnatic are both very decent teams who can pull these upsets off and make these games more interesting. And I'm just very, very unimpressed with EDG's preparation, their drafting. They came into this game just with a very, very outdated playstyle. They looked pretty soft. And I just think overall it was not inspiring really at all. I just do not agree with this number really at all. I think EDG could be a slight favorite, but not minus 450. That's what they are, correct? Minus 450. I just do not agree with that, even slightest. I would have this honestly as like a EDG minus 175, EDG minus 200, maybe something like that. Like I would have this pretty close, like relatively close, maybe EDG slight favorite, like 60-40 or something like that, 55-45, something like that. Like I don't see this as an EDG like 70% or whatever. Like I don't know what you would have of minus 450 plus 350 or minus 450 minus plus 300 at. That would probably be like 75-25 or something, but I feel like this is actually pretty close. And I think just I would be shocked. Like I don't think EDG will go back to like the exact same thing again. They're going to have to make changes. But when you come in to this event, this is your first game on the stage. This is most likely going to be the biggest thing that the big strategy or this is what you're using your strats for. This is what you're playing for, is this game against T1. I just don't think like, it's just not a good sign. Like I think if this is their number one, like best strategy that they're going to pull out, and they looked very, very bad with it, and it looks like a bad strategy and it's very outdated, that's just very uninspiring. Like I'm just not very impressed with that at all. And I'm going with Cloud9, who I think when we look at the draft from game one, it looks like Fnatic had a little bit of a hunch, I guess I could say, with Olaf versus like Olaf Yumi bans against Cloud9. It definitely seems like Cloud9 got outdrafted here. This game was a little bit over kind of before it started because of that. I just feel like Cloud9 got the short end of the stick in day one. EDG's strategy looked very, very poor as well. And it's not like T1 banned a bunch of weird stuff. They just banned regular things. So I just think like if like they could have more strategies and more stuff to pull out. But if this is what they have as their like number one good option, it's just very uninspiring. So I'm going with Cloud9 in this fourth game as well. Third underdog out of these four games that we've talked about. But yeah, I just do not agree with this price tag really at all. It's just a little bit perplexing to me. For this fifth game, I'm not going to go too far from the chalk here. We do have Top Esports minus 1100 versus Gigabyte Marines plus 625. I'm not going to make this one too interesting. I do think I think Top Esports get this job done, and they do it in a relatively good fashion. Obviously, we know Top Esports play at a decent pace. Gigabyte Marines play at a very, very insane pace, nearly 30 combined kills per map. So that's what their quote unquote total would be from their side. I think this is a very good spot for Top Esports. They're obviously going to be very big chalk. They are minus 1100 favorites. They're the like kind of quote unquote safe team to go with here. I think you could still look at an approach to use them in different ways. Again, as I alluded to earlier when we were talking about Top Esports and their I'll try to find it. I'm trying to find here. Okay, I actually found it. So that was a relatively easy. But yeah, so this is from a leak from Doinby translated. An LPL mid laner told Doinby that teams are practicing supported mid lane champions, and after the mid laners get the item, they will start buying support items, and all their resources go to the jungler. While using this strategy, mostly carrying junglers are played. In one instance, Ekram got 3 items at 20 minutes, which is insane. And then this commenter again kind of backs it up and says it's Knight most likely his champion if you Q account. Okay, it's full of karma, mid, etc. So, yeah, it's just it looks like Top Esports are probably going to be pulling that out here, maybe giving a little bit of a test on stage. I'd have to imagine. So that's something to keep in mind. I would try to avoid going a little bit light on looking at something like a Knight captain. I would definitely try to avoid that. I would try to avoid getting Knight into your lineups really at all. I think this is enough information, I think, worthy of trying to leave him out of your lineups. And also because we know he's going to be so heavily owned and stuff. You know, they are minus 1,100 favorites. People are going to get there. I think you should get there as well. I think this is a very good spot for Top Esports. But again, if you're willing to get to this team, I think you can still go ahead and make it unique and try to leave Knight off. Or if you're going to, then if you're going to get to this team, then just try to do it again in a unique way. Like I think where we looked at yesterday with JD Gaming. Again, I didn't mention this specifically, so I'm not gonna like take credit for it or anything. Like just when I say just get unique and then something unique happens, it's not. You know, it is what it is. But like, for example, if you just made a Kanavi captain, but then went with like missing 369 or something and had a little bit like of a unique stack, just have like a weird amount of players or something different. Just get a little bit different. I think you can. And I think this is a pretty good spot for it. If these leaks are true and all that stuff comes through, I think we could have a pretty big edge. And it makes a lot of sense. I think if people are going to make a Tion captain, they're probably going to do it with another favorite. So try to get a little bit different. Try to make these Tion captains work. Try to get them with underdogs and leave off a lot of money. That that could work, just like we saw with Kanavi yesterday, that kind of thing. So I think you can again want to get a good amount of TES here, but just make it unique. Just get different with it. And, try to get like a Tion captain, maybe with Jackie 11 Mark or something. Do a 3-man that way. Just get a little bit weird. Again, I think this is a very good spot for them, but, get unique. And then the last one up, Dom1 versus JD Gaming. Again, this is odd. I'm going with my 5th underdog or 4th underdog here. I just think Dom1 looked very, very solid yesterday. And I think this meta is actually suiting them very well. I think this... we're gonna have to learn a little bit more about we're gonna have to learn more about the jungle champion pool and how that stuff is going to shake out. There's still a good bit of unknown, but when it comes down to looking at how Canyon played the map and completely decimated this game with this Graves and stuff, and then we saw the same thing happen with RNG. Like I could definitely just see something happening here, something similar happening here. Especially when we saw how bad, how susceptible JD Gaming were to some of the things happening from EG. I think if we just saw, obviously Dom1 are a big step up from EG. So if we give this Dom1 team the same advantages that JD Gaming will give to, okay, I completely butchered that analogy, but if JD Gaming give the same advantages to Dom1 that they gave to EG, then Dom1 should have no problems running away with this game as well. Something similar to how they did in their first series. I think this is going to be pretty close. I think we have a minus 200 favorite here that has a wide range of outcomes. Obviously, we've seen JD Gaming and overall the LPL lose a good bit of their games in these best of ones. I think this is a very good spot for Dom1 to steal the group, I think, away from JD Gaming. I think overall when we look at a lot of these top head-to-head teams, they're going to split matchups probably. So why not just take the underdog on the first attempt and go there again if they lose? So I'm going to lock in Damwon as one of my more favorite underdogs again. I think these odds are very, very confusing in my opinion. I think both these teams play with a pretty solid pace. Damwon's numbers are not there, but again, we saw it yesterday when they were backing up Canyon and his stats or his stuff. I think if both of these teams are willing to fight, this is definitely a series I want to be a big part of, and Damwon is especially the side I want to be on. I think this is a pretty crazy price tag, all things considered. I would have this as like a slight, like a coin flip maybe, and I think again you're getting one of them at a plus 155 price tag. Overall, when we look at the whole slate, I have 4 underdog picks here, and I feel pretty decent with most of them. If I were to rank them in kind of confidence order, I would definitely have Damwon, Cloud9, and EG. All 3 of those dogs I would consider kind of on the upper end a little bit. Like I feel pretty good with all 3 of those teams. Cloud9 obviously stand out as their number is pretty insane, but I would have these all very, very close. I think especially if you could get, even if Cloud9 only hit, then they should at least cover your bet for the other 2, and then you hope one of the other 2, or maybe both of them come through. You never know. We got it right yesterday. We might as well go back to it again today. It's not like anything's changed. I have the same opinions. I'm not chasing these underdogs just because I like these spots. I pick who I pick, and I go where I want to. If you guys have been following the channel for a while, you guys know I don't just pick to pick or just try to get underdogs, force them in for no reason. I pick what I like, and I try to find avenues and angles to get a little bit different. When we're looking at the DFS slate overall, I think Cloud9 EDG's, I don't know, it's tough. I would like to get some Cloud9 exposure just because I'd imagine they're going to be overlooked. And EDG did give up a good bit yesterday, and I definitely don't think Cloud9 are going to be able to close the game out with the same level of swiftness that EDG did, or sorry, that T1 did. So I definitely think if EDG are willing to die this many times to T1, I think if Cloud9 make the game a little bit closer, we could definitely see a good level of kills coming in. So I don't mind getting to that spot. Again, I'll kind of scroll through, and you guys can pause, and look at the player numbers whenever you want to, and look and compare to whatever team you're building with. But that's it for the player numbers. So again, these numbers are a little bit hard to use, but I definitely think EG2 is probably my favorite spot. I think Damwon JD Gaming is in a very good spot as well. I think Top Esports Gigabyte Marines is in a pretty solid spot. I would probably have those as like a little bit 3, kind of above everyone else. Then I would probably have like a tier below that Cloud9 EDG. Rogue DRX, and I'd probably have Fnatic T1 as probably like the solo bottom tier game. I could definitely see EG G2 and Damwon JD getting pretty crazy, specifically that Damwon JD Gaming. I think that's actually probably my number 1. However, I think EG G2 might be a little bit overlooked. So I like I like EG a good bit. I like Damwon a good bit. I like Top Esports as a pretty solid pairing to go with those 2. Specifically when we look at Top Esports Damwon, I think getting double jungler there makes a lot of sense. Looking at Tian and Canyon make a lot of sense. EG, specifically mid lane. The problem is, I think you could definitely look at mid lane or double mid laners with EG and Damwon. Obviously, I think JoJo and Showmaker both have a good bit of upside. I would try. Again, I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea to go to Knight because his numbers are so good. But if the leaks are true and they do come out with a support mid laner, I think Knight will probably be the most owned player on the whole slate. I think it's just a good spot to add all these factors in and go ahead and leave Knight out of your lineups. So I would try to avoid Knight, but if you don't want to, I don't blame you. So if you do want to go with like JoJo Showmaker or something like that, if you wanted to try to do like Tian and then go with Inspired, for that I keep wanting to say EDG when I want to say EG, but when you do go with the top esports EG stack. I think you could go double jungler. I would try to look to get these Tion captains in with these underdogs. I think that's a good way to get a little bit unique. I think again you can build with top esports. I'm probably going to, but if you wanted to mix and match like EG, Cloud9, Dom1, and then like a little bit of top esports, I think that's a very solid recipe for success for tomorrow. So that's something I'm definitely going to be looking at doing, and those are the kind of cores that I'm going to be going with. Again, specifically Dom1 and EG, and then I'll probably try to get in some Cloud9 as well, just because I know they're going to be pretty low owned. Specifically, when we look at somebody like Berserker, we know his numbers were very, very insane for the team. So when we do look at specifically getting like a Berserker captain with a Sven, and then like a 4-man from somewhere else or something. So like there's a lot of ways you can attack the slate, but I think overall there's actually a good bit of avenue and maneuverability here. It's just kind of picking your spots and hoping you kind of get them to go your way. Again, very solid day one. Let's not give it all back in day two, but I like 400 dogs. I don't love Rogue DRX. And then Fnatic T1. Those are probably two I'm just gonna end up leaving off. But Rogue is a little bit of a decent money line kind of throw out there. So that'll be it for me tonight. Voice is kind of going out. Pretty cold, as you guys can see in the bottom right. My temperature's out there. Kind of voice is going, ranting a lot, but I'm pretty, psyched for a very good performance from day one. Hopefully you can translate it to a good day two as well. So thank you guys for tuning in. I will see you guys all again tomorrow, hopefully with a similarly hyped video talking about having a great day two. So that'll be it for me. I will see you guys all then, and thank you guys for tuning in.